Taoiseach, you were talking about your previous incarnations in government in terms of the survivors of the industrial schools and the things that you did. One of the scandalous things that was done under a Fianna Fáil government was the decision to limit the liability of the religious congregations who were responsible for the abuse of those who went through the industrial schools and such institutions to €128 million, and that the rest of it would be covered by the state. And contrary to your last contribution in response to my question, the survivors I'm talking about are saying their needs are not being met, that the promises made by Bertie Ahern and previous governments that you were involved in to deal with intergenerational poverty, the deprivation that is suffered by many of the industrial schools, the mental health issues, counsellors that they choose, real housing support to get people out of really appalling housing conditions and so on, have not been met. And that many of the bodies that were set up without proper consultation with them, over their heads, and that real engagement, particularly with some of the worst victims who tended to come from poorer backgrounds, that engagement has not really happened, and those commitments and promises made have not been met. So, first of all, if you would just clarify, is the dissolution legislation? Are you proposing dissolution legislation, and is that effectively the state washing its hands of its obligation to those survivors? And secondly, do you not think the Woods deal? We had a campaign to repeal the seal on people's histories and records. Should we not repeal the deal that limits the liability of those religious organisations, and that they would use their very considerable property and other assets to support the survivors that they abused?
And in relation to Deputy Boyd Barrett's points, I would say this, that, and I get that, I think what happened to those who were committed to industrial schools was an appalling abuse by the state at the time. It's very easy for people living in the modern era to look back and say, and because many of these homes, they all evolved from previous iterations and so on. There's a combination of forces that lift people from cruelty man to the courts to the Gardaí. People made decisions arbitrarily. That's because a woman might have been separated, or because someone could have had alcohol problems in the home. The father, someone just arbitrarily said, "You're going into a home. This is no fit place for you to be." And this was said to me by survivors. The state did respond too comprehensively, and that should be acknowledged. Perhaps your point is it needs to continue to respond. But let's not decry and undermine completely and say nothing was done, or a lot was done. The redress scheme was simply designed to make sure people didn't have to go through the courts. There was an option. When we originally did the response, we removed the statute of limitations to facilitate industrial schools. But in essence, they'd have been in the courts for years. And that would have been too much anguish, if you like, and too difficult. So that's why the redress scheme was developed in a bona fide way, to try and accelerate some redress for the survivors of the industrial schools. My own view always was that it was much more than redress, and that the focus and emphasis should always be on the housing side, the health side, counselling and other supports that people required, given the impact that being in an industrial school had on their lives, the degree to which it shortened their education possibilities, and even to a certain extent they felt very stigmatised. They lacked complete self-esteem, lack of self-confidence. So their presence in schools did a lot of damage. So I will engage with the Minister for Education around this and try and ascertain where we are now in terms of the needs of those who survived the institutions. Yeah, I will indeed. Yeah.